Everybody. Bonnie and I are from the League of Women Voters, Deerfield, Lincolnshire, and we started a committee back in 2017, the two of us at the convention of the League of Women Voters of Illinois, and therefore started this effort to educate the public about a league position that was adopted by the League of Women Voters of the United States in 1970. So it's a 50-year-old position. And in the presentation, we'll explain a little bit about what was going on at that time that caused the league to adopt that position. So what I'm going to present to you here is a presentation, and it's scripted, that was prepared by our committee over the years with a lot of input from different members. So we're very proud of the work of our members. And the idea was that anybody could take our materials and present them anywhere to any kind of a group that they were interested in. You didn't have to be an expert. You could just there we go. You could just use the script. So I'm going to start and then we'll go straight through. When you have some questions, please put them in the chat. And then at the end of the presentation, Bonnie will read questions from the chat and we'll see if we can't answer them. So as Roberta said, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League is a natural home for the movement to abolish the Electoral College because the League is about making democracy work better for everyone. The League is specifically and proudly nonpartisan, which means that it can work to improve our democracy without partisan rancor and can help unite people around a common purpose. It has national voice, national reach, and a trusted voice, as well as over 600 local leagues across the nation that are comprised of citizens like us working to improve our democracy. Now, we are nonpartisan because we never support a particular party and we never support a political candidate. However, over the years, we have adopted many positions on various topics. And the way that we adopt these positions is quite involved. So if it's a national position like this Electoral College position, it required being adopted as a study at a convention. Then a national committee had to be formed to do background research. Then the research and the questions were distributed to all the leagues in the nation that were interested in participating in the study. Then in the local leagues, they had a local study group. So then the local study groups did research, and then they brought their leagues together to answer the questions and then sent back their responses to these questions to the national organization, which then compiled everything and came up with a position. So it's about it's a 2-year process at minimum. Sometimes it takes longer to adopt a position, and then it has to be ratified at the subsequent convention. So this is why our positions are so meaningful to all the members of the league, because across the country, we all participated in adopting and developing these positions. The League of Women Voters recommends many changes to our election system that would increase fair and representative participation in our democracy, from issues such as voter information and registration to candidate selection and election procedures. Today, we'll talk about how the Electoral College damages our democracy and how the League is working to abolish it in favor of a direct popular vote for electing the president and vice president. And as I said, we adopted this position in 1970 and most recently updated it in 2010. So first, let's talk about where the Electoral College comes from. Why did the framers of the Constitution create the Electoral College? This is a discussion which could and has taken up several book chapters. I'll try to distill it down to its essential elements as understood by scholars who have tried to answer this question. The framers' most important consideration was that they wanted to limit the potential for corruption and concentration of power and to maintain independence between the executive and legislative branches. Therefore, they wanted a method other than having Congress select the president, which was the method generally suggested by the delegates at first. So why not just elect the president directly by the people? Some of the Constitution's framers worried that large distances and lack of communication would make the people ill-informed about the candidates and unlikely to choose the best person. They worried people could be easily misled by a few designing men, or would simply vote for the candidate from their own state. They wanted some kind of intermediary system. It is worth noting that very few of the framers were worried about angry mobs hijacking the selection of the president. The worries were more about how a vast population, to them it seemed vast, not to us now, how a vast population spread over a large country would be able to make an informed choice. There was some element of the ongoing tension between northern and southern states as well. Slaveholding states did not want direct election because they wanted their enslaved people to count as, quote, 3/5 of a person in determining the number of electors the state received. Remember that this was the arithmetic used to determine their numbers in the House of Representatives. So having the elector system artificially boosted the voting representation of slaveholding states, just as it did in Congress. Whereas a direct popular vote would only count the number of people who could, of course, vote, which did not include enslaved persons. Well, let's see, there we go. In fact, evidence suggests that there was a lot of discussion, confusion, and changing of minds during the process of figuring out the election system. It was one of the last issues discussed at the exhausting, long, hot, contentious convention, and fatigue and impatience may well have played a role in its adaptation. Remember, the framers had left their businesses, left their farms, left their law practices, and they had come to Philadelphia, and they were there from May to September, which is hot in their wool suits and no air conditioning, you can imagine. And they were trying to get a new country going, and they already had enemies, and they didn't know if this experiment would even work. And so just getting the framework established was a major accomplishment. So they were in no mood to really spend too much time on election of the president because they had to get on with things. So the system they came up with had broad but unenthusiastic support and seemed like the best they could do at the time. The quote is the second choice of many, but the first choice of few, with little idea how it would play out in reality. One historian has called it a jerry-rigged improvisation. Most of the framers did intend for the selection of the president to be based on the popular wishes of the citizenry, with the elector system and intermediary system intended to breach the difficulties of distance and communication. James Madison considered the elector system to be the next best thing to direct selection, saying that, quote, the president is indirectly derived from the choice of the people. However, there is some evidence that they also expected the electors to exercise their own discretion in the selection of the president as a bulwark against corruption, bias, or misinformation. But electors have almost always acted as a rubber stamp on the votes of the people, with very few exceptions. In those instances where an elector has voted differently than the state's voters dictated, they have generally been met with a great deal of protest and anger, which is to say, the people expect the electors to be a rubber stamp on the will of the people and have never been interested in them exercising their own discretion. But so you know, though, that the system that they came up with, and this is what's left in the Constitution to this day, and I'm going to read from Article 2, Section 1. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. So with all that verbiage, the actual choosing of the electors was originally given to the state legislatures to decide how to do it. And it was only after, if you all saw Hamilton and so forth, after that time when the parties arose, that's when most of the states went to having elections in the states to elect the party that would be represented by the electors. But that winner-take-all system is not in the Constitution. That decision was made by those states. And as you know, two of our states, Maine and Nebraska, do not have a winner-take-all for the whole state. They divide it up. It's just winner-take-all on a smaller level, but they divide it up by districts. So they can do that. And state legislatures still today can make decisions on how they want to appoint, choose, and decide who the electors will be. But as far as the founders' original concerns, notice that none of their original concerns remain relevant today. Citizens are quite able to become informed about the candidates no matter where they live. The framers' concern about the corruption and concentration of power that would come if Congress selected the president is still valid, but no one is proposing that we move to this system. Although there are some parts of the Electoral College that do give Congress power, which we're going to talk about later. And any notion that we need electors to exercise their own discretion to overturn a so-called poor decision by the people has just not been borne out over time. Now, we wrote this before January 6th, so some of this has actually been changing. And at this point, I'm going to give a little commercial. The League of Women Voters of Illinois is hosting an issues briefing next week. It's it's 12 sessions on different topics spread out over the entire week. And the session on Thursday evening is going to be about the Electoral College and the ramifications of the Electoral College that became evident in the January 6th efforts to stop the counting of the ballots and what shall we say, and efforts since that time to manipulate the Electoral College. So in looking at how the Electoral College came about, it's clear that it's not a foundational text of our Constitution that should not or cannot be changed. In fact, they did change it a couple of times. They made changes where it used to be that the runner-up became vice president, regardless of whether he agreed with the first winner. So now they have the vice presidents attached to the president. And then there were some other changes in the 18th Amendment, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So we can change. And don't forget that the founders included a means for changing the Constitution, and we'll talk about that too. It's been done 27 times already. So we think that it's time to change this system as well. And there's ample evidence that this system is directly damaging to our democracy and does indeed need to be changed. So why does the League of Women Voters take the position to abolish the Electoral College? It is really very simple. It comes down to the concept of one person, one vote. The unintended result of the Electoral College is to put the choice of president and vice president in the hands of voters in only a few so-called battleground states or swing states. I don't have to tell you the names of these states because we are all very, very familiar with them. They are four of our well-known swing states, and they are among the 19 states that received all campaign visits from the two presidential candidates in 2008. The other 31 states received not a single presidential campaign visit. Well, you might ask, so what? In the age of television and smartphones, we can easily watch the candidate speeches no matter where they make them, and we can get the highlights from any of a number of news outlets. True, but the problems with this system go well beyond our ability to hear what the candidates have to say. Part of the League's core mission is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. As such, Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Electoral College system is that it creates a disincentive to vote for citizens living in non-battleground states, which is the majority of people in our country. If you live in Illinois or Mississippi, why should you bother going out on a cold or rainy day to vote when you know your state is going to go blue or red anyway? So the example I always use, in Illinois, in recent years, we've gone blue in Illinois. So it begs the question, why would a Republican or an independent even bother to vote? Because it seems like it's useless to change the way Illinois will go. And of course, that negativity then carries down to all the other offices that are being voted on. And in fact, Democrats don't have an incentive to vote because the state will go Democratic for president anyway. And so it's a disincentive for people to make their voice heard, which is exactly the opposite of what the League wants everyone to do. Whatever your choice, we want people to make their voice heard. The data from 2016 bear this out. In the graph, you can see that the percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for president was significantly lower in non-swing states compared to the swing states. The Electoral College decreases participation in our democracy. This is bad for democracy. And this focus on swing states carries over into policy. For example, a study of trade policy found that industries employing large number of voters in swing states were more likely to receive trade-related protection from the federal government compared to industries concentrated in non-swing states. One can ask what other policy decisions might be influenced by whether the affected states are swing states. Think about climate change, for example. Another significant negative effect of the Electoral College system is that it polarizes our electorate and exaggerates our sense of being a divided nation, a nation of red versus blue. Now here's the 2016 election. Did you know that in Alabama in 2016, 35% of voters chose Hillary Clinton? Or that 32% of California voters chose Donald Trump? That is a lot of people, not a fringe minority, but a significant portion of the populations of those states. And these are two, quote, solidly red or blue states. What about Colorado, where 43% of voters went for Trump? Or Georgia, where 46% went for Clinton? Doesn't matter. You look at this map and all you see is red and blue, right and left, black and white. There are no centrists. There's no complicated middle ground. There's no reason to even talk to those people in those other states because they are just too different from me. Their views are too extreme. This map, with which we have all become so familiar, is extremely damaging to our national unity and our ability to see the great variety of public opinions that exist everywhere and that deserve to be heard. Indeed, they need to be heard, as diverse opinions are as critical to democracy as the vote itself. Without the Electoral College, we wouldn't have to see our election results through this distorted lens. Let's see, did I go back too far? Let's see, okay, there we go. What if the election results simply looked like this? Two numbers, both very large, even in the most lopsided of victories. Remember Reagan versus Mondale in 1984? You may remember it as the most lopsided Electoral College victory in modern history, which it was. But you probably don't remember that more than 37 million people voted for Mondale, 41% of voters. That is not a trivial number, and it highlights the way the Electoral College simply erases the diversity of opinion in our democracy. Because when we see it through the Electoral College, almost all of those so-called blue votes are utterly forgotten, erased. Where did all those Mondale voters go? Are all 37 million of them in Minnesota there and DC? No, they're gone. They don't exist. All we see is 525 to 13, the Electoral College outcome. If we began to see election results like this, we might begin to see ourselves as part of a unified democracy, choosing our leader no matter where we live. Might we become more open to diverse, complicated opinions among our neighbors and fellow citizens? Let's see, I'm losing my pointer. There we go. More willing to live among people who disagree with us? Imagine if, instead of seeing ourselves as red and blue, we simply saw ourselves as Americans. The results in two recent elections point us, of course, to another serious problem with the Electoral College, which is that it can lead to a presidential winner who did not receive a majority of the votes. This has happened 5 times in our history, and it's the main reason most people find the Electoral College troubling. And I'm going to take a little side trip here on this slide to talk about the Tilden Hayes election of 1876. So this was a very contentious election. And here's a little piece I found. So one notable historical exception to a smooth transition was the election of 1876, when Democrat Samuel Tilden had emerged from the close election, leading Republican Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio. Now remember, in those days, the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, so they were, and the Democrats were more the Southern, might say conservative party. So Democrat Tilden was 1 vote shy of the 185 needed to win, because you need to have a majority of the electoral votes. In addition, so they didn't have a majority winner because they had some third-party candidates. In addition, Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina had particularly controversial elections, and each of those states submitted 2 slates of electors. Each of those slates, those electors, claimed victory in violent and confused elections. The Democratic-controlled House and the Republican-controlled Senate created a commission. And you might have heard people talking about, oh, let's have a commission in 2020. Well, that's because there is a precedent. They had a commission that they formed to try to hammer this out, to come to a compromise on how to resolve the problem. And what they did was, even though, let's see, how did it go? Yeah, I get mixed up on who was who. Even though the Democrat had a few more votes, they gave the vote to the Republican, who had less, on the condition of withdrawing federal troops from the South and thereby ending Reconstruction. And that was the beginning of Jim Crow. So it's from that contentious, confusing election with states submitting multiple slates of electors that the Electoral Count Act was written to try to set some deadlines and some administrative controls over which slate is going to count when for when, you know, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So back to the main drag here. So you may have heard somebody say, well, yes, all of this is true, but here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. We'd like to walk through some of the most common myths and misperceptions about what the Electoral College does and does not accomplish, and what it was meant to do, and how it's impacting our democracy. Now, these are not just fringe theories, by the way. These are the main points that supporters of the Electoral College use to defend this antiquated system, and none of them stands up under scrutiny. Myth number 1. Without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by a couple of big states like California, New York, and Texas. Let's run through the numbers to see how it would actually play out in an election by popular vote. Now, this is kind of a constructed example based on some figures. So let's say, for example, the sake of this example, every state in the union voted 60% to 40% for the same candidate. An absolute landslide. I mean, every state 60-40 for the same person. And let's see how many states it would take to get us up to 50% if we elected the president by the national popular vote, by how many people voted for him, going from the largest state to the smallest. So California is the largest, has the most votes, and if 60% of its voters went for that candidate, it would be 7% of the national total. Next is Texas, so we'll add that to the total. Remember, in this example, we have 60% of voters choosing the same candidate in every state. So we're seeing how long it would take for the candidate to get to 50% of the votes, assuming they all voted the same way. So now we'll add Florida, here's New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and we're not even halfway there. Let's add a half dozen more states. Oops, sorry about that, I went a little too fast, and see where we get. In fact, it would take the votes of 27 states to get us over the 50% threshold, even in this incredibly lopsided scenario. In reality, of course, Texas and California might go for different candidates, in essence, canceling each other out. And the margins of victory would likely be much smaller in many of these states, which means it would take even more states' votes to get us up to 50%. And you can do this same exercise for cities, by the way. The 10 largest cities in the country make up only about 10% of the vote. If the largest 100 cities all voted unanimously for the same candidate, every city dweller voted for candidate A, it would still only get us to 30% of the vote total. And this includes this top 100 list includes cities like Laredo, Texas, and Spokane, Washington. These are cities with populations in the 200,000s. But that was a theoretical kind of constructed example. Let's look at the actual numbers from the 2012 election. All right, now this one actually will give you exactly what you need to know. You will see the votes from the states that went for Obama, starting from largest to the largest number of Obama votes to smallest number of Obama votes. So if you look at the left, this blue line is California's Obama votes. So you can see it only goes up that far from the whole state of California. Now add to that, so you're keeping the California, and then you're adding the New York Obama votes on top of it. So now that second line is California plus New York of all the Obama voters. And then the third line, now it's the California, the New York, and the Florida Obama voters in 2012. Now you add Illinois. So I'm sorry to be slow, but I really want to get this across. The fourth line there, or fifth line for Illinois, that's all the California, New York, Florida, Texas, and Illinois voters that voted for Obama in actual numbers from the actual data. And that's how far it got. So you keep adding in each of these states how many Obama voters there were in each state, and you keep going up. I'm pointing to the screen as if you can see me do it. I feel like an idiot. But anyway, you keep going up the chart there. And then finally, look at all these states and all the Obama voters from these states to get to 63.4 million votes to win. That would be at 50%. And then the other ones to the right, you could say are gravy. So those little bits, and it looks like hardly anybody in Alaska voted for Obama because I can't see any difference there. So the one figure that you can just think about is that in the Trump-Clinton election, there were 139 million votes cast, and 12 million of those were California. So there is, as we want to say, let me read the way it's said so nicely by our author here. It is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by just the largest states or the largest cities. The fact is that direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented regardless of where they live. Voters from swing states would count just the same as voters from non-swing states. Voters from the city would count just the same as voters from the country. A California Republican's vote would count just the same as a California Democrat's. Let's look specifically at California, where the presidential vote is split just as it is in all states. Actually, all states are purple. It's just different shades of purple. 32% of California voters went for Trump in 2016. Once the state's votes were totaled, all 4.5 million of those Trump votes were erased. Why should only a portion of a state's votes count in choosing the president of all the people? In a national popular vote system, those votes would be added to the national total along with the votes of all the other states, regardless of who got the most in each state and regardless of whether that state is big or small. The fact is, we would no longer be voting by state, but by person. So a California voter would get no more say in our presidential election than a voter from Mississippi, Rhode Island, Kansas, or any other state. This is what the framers intended when they unanimously agreed with James Madison's statement that the president is to act for the people, not for the states. Myth number 2, smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. The fact is, there is no coherent small state or large state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. Even the smallest state has substantial diversity within it, and it is a fallacy to suggest that when a state goes red or blue, that this represents the interests of the entire state. The concerns of a farmer are likely to be very different than those of a computer programmer, whether they live in New Hampshire, Nebraska, or any other small state. Small states represent a great diversity of economic interests, and they share many of these interests with large states. For example, agriculture. Most farmers live in states with large populations, such as Texas, Florida, California, and Illinois, and they share economic interests with farmers from smaller states all over the country. The great political battles of American history have been fought between opposing ideologies or economic interests, not between large states and small states. There is no coherent small state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. The representatives of small states do not vote as a bloc in Congress, and their citizens do not vote as a bloc for president. The numbers, we're talking about small population now, the numbers from the 2016 election show this emphatically. The smallest 1/3 of states, those with fewer than 6 electoral votes, did not all go for the same candidate. In fact, they were exactly evenly split, with 8 going for Clinton and 8 going for Trump. Small states do not vote as a bloc, and they do not benefit from the Electoral College. In fact, smaller states are routinely ignored by presidential candidates under the current system, both as candidates and as presidents. And as I mentioned earlier, swing states are the ones that receive the vast majority of attention from candidates. And swing state interests are more heavily reflected in our laws and policies than are the interests of small states, large states, red states, or blue states, especially in election years. And, you know, the swing states change from year to year a little bit. So in our last election, there were some different swing states, but they were still the swing states. So there's no basis for the myth that smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College. In fact, the Electoral College actually diminishes the rightful representation of larger states. For example, Virginia's population is almost 9 times larger than Delaware's. Okay, so now let's see how good your recall of images is. So try to remember in your mind how much smaller Delaware is than Virginia. but it only gets 4 times as many electors because electors are based on the number of senators and representatives from each state. Is that fair? So if you think about it like this, so California, I don't know about the latest division, but it had 55 electors because it had 53 representatives and 2 senators. So adding those 2 senators to the 53 representatives of California did not give them such a big impact percentage-wise based on their population. But Wyoming, which only has 1 representative in Congress because it has such a small population, now you add 2 more electors to that one, and you've tripled the number of electors that Wyoming has for its small population. So that's why this disparity occurs, is because of the addition of the 2 additional electors to each state. Myth number 3, the Electoral College protects the rights of the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Protecting minority rights is a critical part of democratic societies, and the founding fathers designed our government accordingly. As a result, 2 of our 3 branches of government are designed to ensure the protection of minority rights. The first is the courts. Their role is to ensure the constitutional rights of the individual, regardless of the opinion of the majority of citizens. The second is the Senate, in which every state, regardless of population size, gets 2 representatives. This ensures that Wyoming gets heard just as loudly as New York, even though more people live in New York. We do not protect a minority by giving them outsized political power. We protect the rights of minority groups and individuals through our Constitution's Bill of Rights, our courts, and our laws. Our votes should all count equally. The president is supposed to represent the interests of all Americans as fairly and equally as possible. This means 1 person, 1 vote. Myth number 4, abolishing the Electoral College will mostly benefit Democratic candidates. Modern analysis shows that in 1960, Republican Richard Nixon actually won the popular vote by about 48,000 votes over Democrat John Kennedy. And I will date myself and tell you that in 1960 for that election, I grew up in Evanston and I was actually a Republican teen. And so I worked for Rumsfeld was running in the 13th. That was the one time he was in Congress. And I worked for Richard Nixon at that time. And I remembered, this is personal to me, I remembered from those days that we had learned that Nixon actually, it had to do with the way Alabama listed their electors. I can explain it to somebody. He actually had more popular votes, but Kennedy completely buried him in the electoral count. So Nixon thought it was sour grapes, to try to overcome that. But as a teenager, I just couldn't understand it. I'm like, but he won, and so that is when I personally got interested in the Electoral College. So that's why I'm so excited to be working on this now. I really believe in it. But let's look at this question of only Democrats. All right. So here is this is the 2004 election, the Electoral College map for the 2004 election. So this is the actual map, and George Bush won the electoral count, and he had 3 million more votes than John Kerry. So that is a big percentage. Now we're going to change the map. Take a look at Ohio here. Ohio did go red for Bush, but Ohio only went red for Bush by about 100,000 votes. If those 100,000, that's not so many in a state with millions of people. If Kerry had won Ohio, had been able to turn that blue, he would have won the Electoral College count, even though Bush had 3 million more popular votes. So that really was, you could say it was a close call for the Republicans. And of course, in giving this talk, if we're trying to persuade people that the Electoral College should be abolished, it sure would have helped our case, I will tell you, if that had happened. But the Republicans, it was a miss is as good as a mile, so it worked out for them. But on a more personal level, what about the Republican voter in so-called blue Vermont, or the Democratic voter in so-called red Kansas? Neither of these voters feels that their vote for president counts. This is a disincentive for them to vote, and this is bad for democracy. This system can and has affected both parties. This is a nonpartisan issue. This is an issue of better government and better voting procedures. So how do we abolish the Electoral College? The League of Women Voters supports a constitutional amendment that would replace the Electoral College with direct election of the president. In theory, it's quite simple. Congress passes a resolution by a 2/3 majority in both houses. Now, the president doesn't weigh in on it. So first you have to get both houses by 2/3 majority to support a resolution. Then this resolution goes to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it, which is 38 states. So it's going to take some time, and it's not an easy job. But on the other hand, it is the legal way that you change things by the Constitution that is set up in the Constitution for making changes. So if you can persuade enough people in the country, however long it might take, then you have achieved a consensus in the country that this is necessary. And that's what we're trying to do. We don't expect this to happen in one day. We are trying to persuade people and demonstrate that this is something that would be better for all of us. And if it takes a long time, then that gives us plenty of time to try to convince people this is the right way to go. So getting to a constitutional amendment will take time. It's not going to happen this year. The League of Women Voters is currently focusing on what we're doing today, which is starting discussions about where the Electoral College comes from and how it's bad for democracy. And perhaps more importantly, we want people to understand that passing a constitutional amendment is possible and can happen. Many of us think that ratifying new amendments is a thing of the past, something for a bygone era of political unity, a quaint anachronism. Here's a timeline showing the dates that all amendments after the Bill of Rights were ratified. You can see that our history includes flurries of constitutional activity punctuated by long periods of inactivity. There was a period of 60 years between the first two clumps, then another gap of 43. There were 18 years between the amendments of the 1930s and the 1950s and 60s, then a gap of 21 years until our most recent amendment was passed in 1992, which, by the way, that amendment in 1992 that had to do with the congressman cannot raise their own salary while they're in office, it has to come afterwards, was first proposed 200 years before 1992. So that amendment took 200 years. I hope ours doesn't take that long, but it's already been 70 or 50, so I don't know. So what distinguishes these periods of constitutional activity? They tended to be periods of great national political activity when the citizens were feeling that our democracy was in crisis, where the demand for change across our society was persistent and loud. There was the period after the Civil War, the progressive era of the turn of the last century, and the civil rights era in the 1950s and 60s. We might be in the middle of another period of political activity, of demand for change. Only time will tell. But the level of activity we are seeing now and the genuine concerns about the resilience of our democracy are remarkable. Whoops, let's see, let me go back. In fact, we should be on the verge of adding a 28th Amendment to the Constitution, which is the Equal Rights Amendment. Amending the Constitution is not a thing of the past. It is a thing of right now. There is a process for doing so, And that process requires the citizenry to make it known to our legislators that we want change. We do that all the time with legislation. It's the same for amendments. We just have to build a stronger consensus and a louder voice. It is, as always, one step at a time. Now, I'm not going to go into the national popular vote interstate compact because it's been adopted in Illinois. If you have questions, I can field those later. And what about proportional representation? One reform that the League specifically rejects is the voting by electors based on proportional. Now, this isn't like Kansas and Nebraska, because those are just divided into districts. So it's really just a smaller winner take all. But some people are saying, well, why don't you give exactly the electors based on a proportional representation in your state? The Constitution says that states are free to assign their electors however they see fit. And winner take all is not the only option. Okay, so here we go. So the problem with this system is that it is fairly likely that no candidate would win the 270 electoral vote majority needed to win because there would be third-party candidates. This, according to the Constitution, would send the election of the president to the House of Representatives, where each state, regardless of population, would receive only one vote. So if no one achieves 270, if you really did proportional, which I'm going to show you some charts, and the election goes into the House of Representatives because no one has 270, the way it works is each state gets one vote. So the entire delegation of New York gets one vote. All 20 or 19 representatives in Illinois have to come together and come up with one vote. That person in Wyoming, one vote. So that is the system that's in place now in our Constitution for determining the outcome if there's not a majority of the Electoral College. So let's see how this would work. You're probably scratching your head trying to figure out why this system would make it unlikely that a candidate would receive 270 electoral votes. That is a proportional system. The reason is we always have more than just two parties running for president. There are third parties, fourth parties, and beyond. In the 2016 election, votes were actually cast for 31 different candidates, plus a none of the above in a few states. Some of you might remember the Richard Pryor movie where he ran as none of the above and he won. So I don't know, sometimes. Let's run through a quick example with the 1968 election, a closely fought contest between Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and George Wallace, an unusually strong third-party candidate. So this actually happened in our present system. So in this first slide here, you can see that Richard Nixon won the popular vote by a thin margin. You know, he had 43.4, Humphrey had 42.7, and Wallace had 13.5%. Okay. With the Electoral College, however, Nixon did have far more votes. He had 301 electoral votes, and Humphrey had 191, and then Wallace had 46. Now, what Wallace was hoping for, before we look at proportional, Wallace was hoping to get a few more votes taken away from Nixon to keep Nixon short of the 270. He would have had to have 30 some, so he really didn't come close to it. But his goal, he would never have won himself, but his goal was that if he could take enough away from Nixon to throw it into the House of Representatives, Wallace was hoping to make a deal, you know, and get some concessions from Nixon, whatever they may have been, in order to throw, quote unquote, throw his votes Nixon's way. So it didn't happen, but it could have happened. In more recent elections, in the Trump Clinton election, Bernie Sanders did not run because he understood this problem. I don't know if Bernie could have won enough votes to take away, you know, Clinton's electoral majority, Trump's electoral majority, but he didn't want to take that chance. And so that's how that was. So if we had proportional representation, though, if you exactly, let's see, I want to see where I am here on this. What if they were allocated on percentage of vote? In Kansas, Nixon would have had 4 electoral votes on proportional instead of 7. In Illinois, Nixon would have had 12 instead of 26. In Florida, 6 instead of 14. So as you can see, Wallace and Humphrey are picking off votes bit by bit in each state. When you do this for all 50 states, the results of proportional allocation is that there is no winner in the Electoral College. Nixon fails to achieve the required 270 votes, so the election of the president would have been turned over to the House of Representatives with, as we said, 1 vote per state, and none for DC, by the way, which has more population in DC than the state of Wyoming, or I think it's Vermont or New Hampshire, one of those. The simplest, most permanent solution is to elect the president by direct vote by all the citizens in the United States. 1 person, 1 vote. Abolishing the Electoral College would be a common sense solution to update a system that most Americans agree is utterly out of date, confusing, and downright silly. It's time to start building the momentum that will once and for all abolish this dysfunctional system of electing our president. It may seem like a daunting task, but remember, we've amended the Constitution to change the way we elect senators, to impose term limits on the presidency, to include Washington, D.C. in the election of the president, to eliminate the poll tax, and to change the voting age to 18. All amendments that affect the way we elect our representatives in Washington. There's no reason we cannot abolish the Electoral College if we want to. So there we go. So I'll stop the share, and there we go. That's the end of the scripted presentation with a few little side trips down memory lane from me. And Bonnie has given this presentation admirably to many communities. So I was happy she would join me in case I needed a backup, but she will be happy to go into the chat and ask some of the questions. So Bonnie, can you see the chat all right there?
I see nothing in the chat. There's nothing in there.
I see a couple. There are a couple of.
They send some just to you?
Oh, you know what they did? They sent them just to me. Okay, all right, that's how it worked. All right, so the first one, has the League taken a position on the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact? Okay, you want me to take that one, Bonnie? Because it's kind of,
Sure.
You don't mind? Yeah. So the League has added support of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It was that adoption was made in 2010, and it was added to the position at that convention as an acceptable alternative until the Electoral College can be abolished. So by amendment. So as League members, we cannot speak against the Popular Vote Compact because it's an official League position, and it is already in place in Illinois anyway. So we're just working on the amendment aspect. And if you want to ask more on, let's see, let me see who that was. Dan, let me unmute you, Dan, and see if you have more you want to say about that. There you are. Did you want to expand on your question?
No, I was just curious because
okay.
that is an alternative way of sort of getting to using the popular vote, but rather than going through the whole amendment process. I was just curious.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. And of course, the 19th Amendment. Oh, yeah, the Equal Rights Amendment. Dan also said, of course, the 19th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment. So Leslie, Bonnie, Leslie wants to know, so what now?
So what now?
Yeah, I'll give you the easy one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I pull out my crystal ball and we'll know what now.
Sorry
I
about
think,
that.
the point is, and that I think Rosemary has truly expressed, very well, is that we have to convince people that it's possible. And we have to convince people that this is that we need to move forward. We can't just have inertia. We've seen enough things happen in the course of the last year that have made many people within the league and in other organizations with which we try to partner very concerned. And a lot of them have to do with the cracks in the armor that we saw happen as in leading up to January 6th. And then since then, they've become more prominent, and a lot of more legislation has been introduced in different states. That's the reason that we as a group feel very strongly that we should move ahead with an amendment, because it's permanent. One of the problems with national popular vote, which is it still utilizes the Electoral College system, so it still leaves those cracks in our democracy. And we need, if we amend the Constitution, it's a permanent change, at least until the next amendment. I mean, we've certainly seen that in our country. We can abolish something and bring it back, if it doesn't work out. Did that with drinking. So it's been done. But we can, but that's actually, well, now it's just move forward, be vocal, but that has been well thought out. It's actually, there's a lot of excellent scholars who have come up with, certainly just to say, oh, gee, we'll just eliminate this and the world will be perfect. Well, it won't. It has to be done appropriately. You still have to have enacting legislation around it. You'd have to, in order to, make sure everybody's on the same page. But the point is, you've got to get to the amendment. And that's the direction we feel we really have to go. Did that answer your question?
Let's see, that was Leslie. So let's, let me, I know Leslie has another question there too. Let me unmute her if I can find her here in the screen. Leslie, let's see, where are you? Oops, I think I just passed her. No,
Hi
that's
there.
Laura. Oh, you got it. Thank you. Thank you, Roberta. Hi, Leslie. So you wanted to know how to help. Oh, we're not hearing you. Let's see. Let me ask you to unmute.
There she is.
There,
she
can you hear
is.
me?
Okay. Yeah, we hear you now. Yeah.
So I guess I'm wondering what specifically. So I'm just some schmo out in the suburbs, I'm
Aren't we all?
Like the rest of us.
I just, I'm out here doing my mom thing. I got a kid home that we're doing the COVID thing. And I mean, what can I do? What do I do? Who do I talk to? What do I like? I belong to various progressive groups. What can we do in these groups to help this along?
Right. Well, I want to tell you I'll start with my Carol story, Bonnie, and then you can fill in the rest. One of my dear friends, Carol, who's on our committee, it's a Deerfield committee, but we have league members and even a few non-league people who we've been meeting every month, let me tell you, since 2017. And we've given over 100 presentations. We've given them to all kinds of groups. We've given them to a lot of leagues. So we've been talking. So at one of the first presentations, Carol brought her cousin, Diane. And so one of the things I always say is, wherever there's a conversation, bring it up somehow, say, oh, I just went to this great talk the other night about the Electoral College, and get people talking about it. Because the problem is, at least in the past, as soon as the election was over, people would forget about it, and then it'll come. And so now there's a little more conversation, some of the comics will make comments and some of the candidates are still talking about it, but it needs to be constant. So I mentioned this at that meeting. So Carol tells me later, they were sitting down to the big Italian family Christmas dinner. And there was a lull in the conversation. And so Diane pipes up, so what about that Electoral College anyway? They were looking at her like, really? That's what you want to talk about? So, but she was taking me at my word, so I would say, talking about your progressive groups, we'll go and we'll do this talk for anybody. Of course, on Zoom, it's easy, but Bonnie and I went to Kewanee, we went to Peoria. Another lady and I went up to Manistee, the early days. I don't think I do that now. Bonnie, you want to add about what else could be done?
No, but you can also, you can always, any function where you're talking to your federal representatives, because it's federal legislation that we need at this point. Talking to your state reps, they'd probably be like, well, maybe, because it's real easy for them to deflect because it's not in their laps yet. And so what we need are senators and representatives being willing to, and I know we've certainly seen a change in position within some members of Congress over the course of the last 2 years.
But of course, as league members, we can't speak as league members.
No,
yet, 'cause
that
we
we're
have to have
interested in the
permission from
topic.
national, Yeah.
We're not talking about any specific legislation. The
Right.
only thing we're talking about is the issue.
the
And
issue,
any
right.
individual is allowed to speak to their representative,
Mhm.
or any representative who's willing to talk to you. Doesn't have to be yours, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe they would have that opinion, but about something that is, that is a federal issue. That's like you're allowed to speak about anything you care about to your representatives. So it would be, but talking to friends and neighbors who would also then speak to their representatives is just how momentum is.
So it sounds like we need this topic to be talked about so that can be raised in
Yes.
our sort of awareness. And then it becomes a situation where people are saying, hey, we need our, high government elected officials talking about this.
Right.
And
Yes.
I'm also wondering, my other question was, how does this happen? How does an amendment happen? Who proposes the amendment and how does that work?
Well, Bonnie will give you this. Just don't mention any bills by number.
No, I'm not. A representative in the House of Representatives and a senator in the Senate would introduce a resolution, and a resolution that would then, generally speaking, you're going to have one on each side, and it would have whatever language. Basically, it's going to start off that it would to abolish the Electoral College, but it would do specifically Article 2, Section 1, I think, but that language, it might go through a little more detail of how they would say then that they would propose that it would be done, but the language itself would simply eliminate the language from the Constitution. And Rosemary, I went through that. It has to pass 2/3 to pass both houses of Congress. 2/3 of all representatives, 2/3 of all senators have to pass exactly the same resolution. And then without the president does not have to sign, it goes out to the states. 3/4 of the states have to agree, which is also why, that same process is exactly what. All right, I'm going to put to a side because I don't want somebody saying, oh, but you can. There is one other method of amending our Constitution. It's much more involved. It's never been done in the United States. It's always been done by this process. And this would be the preferred process of the league. Is that we would simply do a resolution.
So we need.
Go ahead.
So I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a slow connection right now. So how do we get, just some senator somewhere, just we find somebody who's sympathetic to this issue? And how do we?
I'll be very cautious. Every year there are some senators and representatives who do propose these bills.
Okay.
For the last since the 1970s, since 1960s, I think every Congress has had this legislation introduced.
So we cannot lobby by telling you we can't talk about a specific bill number because that would be considered lobbying and it's a national issue and we have to be approved.
Right.
But there are bills every session. So you can find out what it is, and then you can, go from there. What I would say.
So just.
Yeah. Go on.
So just any senator in any state can just take up the cause and decide, I want to propose this?
Sure.
Okay,
Just
It
like
does
any
not
other-
require, no one, they don't have to be on judiciary. They don't have to be on
okay,
a particular committee. They,
okay,
anybody can, well, and that's true in the House and the Senate. Any
Okay.
congressman or senator can introduce anything on any topic. They're not,
okay.
by law, there's no.
I just
limit.
wasn't sure about that. Thank you.
And the one thing that I say is that we know that there are people who will never persuade, so we understand that. And then there's a middle ground of people, and we're hoping that we will persuade some people. And then there are people who agree with us who think it can never happen. And that group is the most frustrating because they think, oh, it can never be. And so it's like we have to convince our own allies to get energetic and do this. And the other thing that I believe is I enjoy having discussions with people who disagree, because they're all, we all have different ways of looking at things. And that's what makes our country great, is that we should be able to have civil conversations about things. But all those minutes that you had the conversation, you were talking about it. And it became a thing instead of, oh, it's not a thing. That's the most heartbreaking. Oh, it's not a thing. It's a thing. So that's how I roll.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this was Henry Ford who said, I'm not absolutely certain, but whether you think you can or think you can't, in either case, you're right.
Yes. All right, I guess they're all coming to me directly here. Let's see what we got next. That was Leslie. Thank you for all your time, Leslie. It was good. Jill wants to know, would a petition help get legislators moving this as a resolution? Bonnie?
Sure, maybe. It's worth a shot if it gets more people talking about it. And the problem is, as of course, with the last couple of years trying to get any sort of petitioner going, is just COVID has kind of interfered with a lot of that. Having a petition, generally speaking, will impact a member who's, most of the people signing the petition are from their particular their constituents. So if you get a petition signed by all Illinoisans, you could probably give them to, they would be looked at much more seriously by our two senators than any senator from any other state, simply because you're looking at their constituents. That doesn't mean you can't have other people on it, but that is the stronger way of presenting. Does that end, Jill?
Let's see, let's find Jill and see if, as long as we're, let's see, Jill. I see you.
Yeah.
I see you. There you are.
No, I think that was my question, is like how, like you're saying, get the discussion going. And it seems like an online petition would be an easy way. I mean, I've been getting them now from like other organizations, like Greenpeace has sent me one now. And I feel like we just need to get this, because this needs to happen. Like, I'm a firm believer of it. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to really go through the mathematics of it. So
thank you. We're hoping we're going to go to our national convention in June of the LWVUS, and we're hoping to get the national organization, which has been concentrating, there have been so many things to concentrate on in recent years. The LWVUS really pulled out all the stops for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and for the For the People Act, and that was their main concentration. So we're hoping that in June, we're planning through our grassroots network of the league we're hoping we can bring it to the floor of convention in June and get the national organization to make it a program item and really put their weight behind this. And we've been led to believe this might happen. I don't know, we'll see, but we're going to make that effort. So I've got a train ticket on the California's effort to Denver, and it's going to be a hybrid convention, half in person, and people will be able to view it from home also. So that's because we think the league is a perfect organization to push this topic. So that's what I would say. Bonnie, anything else from you on that?
By all means, I think if we could, the more we could get, a petition is a great idea because it starts conversation.
Yeah.
People look at it and go, gee, is this what I think? And if they, we can provide additional information.
Mhm.
that would be-
But as a league, we can't do it because it's a national issue. We have to have LWS, so that's what we're working on now. Donna, hi, Donna. Let's see. Roberta, maybe you could try to unmute Donna. I see she's got a few things. So first, the latest poll is 61% of people support the abolishing the Electoral College, the highest ever. And I'm betting that's Pew Research that you're talking about, because they often do that. Can we push this presentation through more partner organizations? We've actually gone to a few, I've been to a couple of Rotary, not even partner organizations. I've gone to some weird organizations. We've gone to a couple of, like my own Rotary won't listen to it because they think it's political, but the Deerfield Rotary is going to hear it for the second time. So it's really nonpartisan. It's political, but it's nonpartisan. I've been to a Lions group. Remember, one of our members went to a group called, what is it, the 95th or the 1887? It was some charitable philanthropic organization. We've gone to some of the political parties also. So we'll go anywhere we're invited.
Well, I was thinking of the Declaration for American Democracy has 230 partner organizations. So if you do get this through national, you would have a huge audience.
That's what we're hoping for, Donna.
And
yes.
Then the other thing I thought about, if this does go through national, is just a coordinated 50-state letter writing campaign, letters to the editor to get more, because 61% is already pretty high. And if you could push it up to 75, and then we have a legislative interview. Also, Common Cause used to do questions to people running for office regarding democracy reform. And so this I think was one of the questions, Electoral College. So it, just to be sure that it's on our questions too for legislative interviews. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, although our legislative interviews usually are the state legislators, so they, it doesn't hurt to ask them, because eventually it becomes a state issue, so it's not currently, but it does eventually become a state issue. So yes, getting the national organization to really take this on would help us do all those things you're talking about. Donna, also, Bonnie, I'll have you answer this if you want, or I can. Durbin, King, and Klobuchar have a draft of update to the Electoral Count Act. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't have any comments on the specific legislation. I totally agree that this is something that has to get through Congress this year. They've got to tighten that language down. And I think there's actually belief on both sides of the aisle on this one. So it can be about a bipartisan. It's not going to be nonpartisan. It will certainly be partisan, but it should be bipartisan in getting something done. And I think we just have to continue to encourage our representatives, and that would be certainly that because that's something that needs to be done this year. Before the end of this session of Congress.
That's right. But it's still an administrative act. I mean, it doesn't change the Electoral College. It's setting up timelines for when you have to turn in the election, which one counts, and who in the state has the official say of which slate, it's stuff like that. It's administrative mostly, isn't it? Or am I wrong about that?
No, it is administrative, but the problem is the language is so nebulous that people can get around it. It would have been nicer to have broader, and there's still possibilities for having something a little broader as far as, like, to me, there should be rules that the legislature cannot change the rules on how you pick your Electoral College candidates after the election. That should be set in, it's done, and it cannot be changed until after, after everything is certified. And to me, that could easily be federal legislation. That should be across the country. Yes. Nobody should be allowed to change the rules out from, pull the rug out from under. Things along those lines would be, I would like to see as a part of, but I don't know that would be specifically part of that legislation. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see. All right, thank you,
The
Donna.
comment about on that by
Donna, it was Donna. Anything else, Donna, on that one? No? Okay, let's see. Mary Ann, how many representatives, how many are supporting the Electoral College? How many states? Well, it hasn't come to a vote, so, so we can't, let me see, let me,
we are and
yeah, let me get her back. Mary Ann, so we want Mary Ann Cronauer. Here she is, hi. Hi, Mary Ann. It's
Hi.
still, yeah.
You
it's still-
talked about,
yeah.
you talked about getting representatives and senators to support eliminating the Electoral College, but you have specific numbers. Could you say we have commitments from 50 representatives to do this?
No, we have no commitments because the bill is, it's always still in committee. It hasn't come out to the floor at all. So it's not a thing. It's not a thing. We want to make it a thing.
Well, yeah, I know. I was just curious because I basically listened to your presentation and I'm still basically in favor of the Electoral College. It's done our country very well for the last 220 some years. And I, many years ago, when I was in high school in 1950s, my social studies teacher said, the Electoral College acts as because we're not a democracy, it acts as a stopgap to keep the democracies, if you want to use it that, under control. That sounds rather harsh, but that's how I remember him talking about it. But anyway, I enjoyed the talk. It was very informative.
Well, thank you.
But I will still fight to save the Electoral College because I thought about our country's history. It has given us some great presidents. It has given us some poor presidents, but our country has survived. And that's the most important thing to me.
All right, well, that's what we say. Some people we won't convince, some people we might convince, and some, are with us. And maybe over time, maybe some of the things will convince you and maybe they won't, but at least we're talking about it, aren't we? So there we go.
As I said, and like your one statistics where you used the example of a election with 60-40 and how the numbers would be affected. I don't think there are that many elections that are that far apart. They tend to be closer to like 45-45. And,
yeah, that whole bunch with the pie slices, it's more visual, that we find that people are impressed with the visual. I like that other slide better that shows the actual numbers, of how many of that. It's the main point of that is just that the big states can't really control it. It's to answer that particular myth.
well,
So, yeah, it's a
I'll take
weird
your word for that, but
yeah.
anyway, I'll let somebody else talk.
All right, well, thank you for listening and joining us and for participating. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see who else we have here. Is there agreed upon draft of the proposed amendment? Donna, that's back from Dan again. Do you want to take that one, Bonnie?
agreed upon, no.
No.
There is, different members have introduced slightly different language every year. You can often have as many as 3 or 4 introduced in a single Congress, and they not necessarily, the language just, like I said before, it's very, when you're talking about a constitutional amendment, it's very specific what it exactly wants to change. But the exact wording, no.
And some, most amendments do require additional legislation to support the amendment. So
But they would, additional legislation is required now,
right.
in order to, support the Electoral College. So that's actually one of the things I'm saying that I strongly believe really needs to be buttresses. It needs to be supported because the language is old and not doing what we needed to do, which is protecting the Electoral College.
Yeah. I will say that most of the bills we've seen recently are pretty brief, that just just the bare facts, maybe a few sentences. But Birch Bayh, who brought the amendment to, which is when the league signed on to this in the it was
Which almost
1970.
Yeah, 19,
it
almost.
almost got through Congress, except for, of course, a filibuster that stopped it. But that one, he included Birch Bayh, a famous amendment maker from Indiana, a long time Indianan. I think I know that I think it was one of the longest amendments ever proposed in history. It was because he tried to include all those details in the amendment. So since then, they don't do it that way. So, but I think if you look it up, you'll find that. Donna, again, can the Declaration for American Democracy, again, a national letter writing campaign, that would, we would have to work through our LWVUS, get the LWVUS behind it. It's not something that we as a state league could do at this point, but we're hoping, we have our fingers crossed. Barb Hochstetter, what do you want me to share here? Government website, let me see, I'm gonna see what, Roberta, can you unmute Barbara Hochstedt? She sent me a cool link here. Oh, congress.gov, and you can search for bills. Oh, all right, that's very good. Let me, Barbara, I'm gonna copy that link and then I'm gonna send it to everyone. Let's see if this works. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, I just searched on the word electoral and there's a number of bills you'd have to pick through to see which.
Right, yeah.
Right.
But it's, you can look up anything on that website. I track a set of bills that I watch all the time, and you can do a lot of different things. You can see what your representatives are co-sponsoring. It's very interesting to play around with that website if you have some time.
All right, cool. I put it in the chat there to everybody. So if you want to click on it, and then it'll bring that up and you can save that, save on the top somewhere.
I think, to be totally honest, I don't think there's really any chance that will make it through this, be coming out of committee in either House or Senate this year. So I think that's one of the reasons that, but it is cool to look at, see the different language. I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So let's see, I don't see any others. Do you have any messages, Roberta or Bonnie?
I do not.
I do not.
I do not. We will be hoping to forward this idea at our national convention in June. So we'll see what happens there. I want to thank Rosemary and Bonnie. This has been awesome. Thank you so much to you both. If anybody else has a question, please put it in the chat. We've got a couple more minutes. Otherwise, we might have to, be done early. Oh no, this never happens.
Well, 5 minutes. I will make a pitch if anyone's interested in working with our committee, particularly league members. We are happy to have you join us. And we have several people who do this presentation. We usually go out 2 at a time, and we're always looking for more people to give the presentation or to do other things to help us. So we're happy for participation. Or if you know a group that would like our presentation, if you belong to some organization that is looking for programs, we'll travel, we'll come. Somebody will be free.
Rotary, NAACP, AAUW, you name it, we'll go.
We'll go, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And if they question it, remember, it's a non-partisan issue. It can hurt either part, all 3 parties. It can hurt, we feel it hurts our democracy, but it is not.
Right.
Because of the way it works out recently, doesn't mean it's just to support one party. It can hurt both parties.
Yeah, the league is nonpartisan when it comes to an election. So as far as being in favor of or against a particular candidate or a party, we don't do that. But when it comes to a particular idea like this Electoral College, we've done the research. We've done the grassroots research, and it's gone through a process of consensus. So in order for the league to say, yes, this is how we believe, it's been through a process. This isn't somebody deciding it's a good idea yesterday and off we go. This has been a studied idea. So
I want to
Rosemary-
give a plug for issues briefing. So those of
Yes.
you, for the public and for the members, the league issues briefing is only $25. And for that, you get 12 sessions, 3 on Saturday, 2 on Monday, 2 on Tuesday, 2 on Wednesday, 2 on Thursday, and 1 on Friday. Some are noon, some are 5:30. And our updated now this was the old presentation I gave you today with a few additional comments, but the updated presentation is going to be Thursday evening at 5:30. And we are going to be joined by a national organization called The National Vote, which is going to partner with us in doing the presentation. And they will go more into some of the problems that have come up since January 6th and some of the ways that some people are trying to manipulate some of these aspects of the Electoral College in order to overturn elections. So it's a real serious problem, and it's an updated presentation. Even if you saw this today, I think you will enjoy it.
Issues briefing, just when I was a new member to the league, and as I've grown in my being a part of the league, issues briefing is the event you want to go to. You will be amazed at the caliber of the folks in our league and the knowledge that they present, as well as the folks that we are able to attract to be speakers for this event. So if you want to get charged up, which we all need right now, is some to get us going again for everything that's out there, because there are so many issues we need to work on. So honestly, it's totally worth your time and effort to tune in. You will not be disappointed, believe me. So does anybody have any other questions, or are we pretty much we have exactly 1 minute before we run out of time. So.
Oh, I see one more from Nancy Duxbury. Have we talked to Nancy yet? Do you
Nancy, please talk to us.
Yeah, do you think the legal action against the states that tried to enter different slates of electors than those that won their states will impact the Electoral College and how it functions? Do you want to take that one, Bonnie? You want me to take that one? Let's see.
Would you read the question again?
Yeah, it's and meanwhile, Roberta, if you want to unmute Nancy.
I did.
Okay.
So Nancy, you're free to talk.
Yeah. Do you think the legal action against the states, I'm not sure that it was states that did it, that's the problem, that tried to enter different slates of electors than those that won their states? So remember that Wisconsin was the first one we heard about, but others did also, will impact the Electoral College and how it functions?
Yes, absolutely. That's part of the issue, is the fact, and part of what they're talking about having to tighten down when they're talking about amending the Electoral Count Act of 1876. Am I right there?
Yeah.
Something like that.
No, 77. I think it's 77.
77.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they did it a year later.
Is the fact that language was not specific enough as to, people attempting to bring, because actually what happened in the 1870s and the Tilden
Hayes,
Hayes election was there were different, slates that were sent. There were 2 slates that were sent from Florida, 2 slates that were sent and southern states. And so that's what caused them even to write that legislation in the first place, and trying to make it not so chaotic. And so that it wasn't some backroom deal about how somebody becomes president, that it was actually, it's following a specific law, so that, and there's no, to increase the transparency of this, that when votes are certified by the appropriate people who are supposed to certify it within that state, that's done. And that nobody can change it or attempt to change it, which is what we saw attempt to happen. And since it was it was too close. It was uncomfortably close to being successful, to undermine what it was that the state wanted to do. There, if, when they start saying, oh, we're allowed to change our minds if we think there's any fraud, without saying there has to be a basis for fraud. You've got to you have to prove that there's fraud. You have to do so within this amount of time, or brought at least legitimate concerns that actually were acknowledged by the courts or experts or all those kinds of things. That's why to me, that legislation has got to be done this year. So I'm hoping I'm not going off on a tangent on what it is that you were asking about, Nancy, but if you want to, I know we got to go, but
yeah, no,
it won't
passionate on this one, I will admit.
Yeah, it won't change the Electoral College. It'll change that one aspect of how the electors slates are chosen and those kinds, the administration. But Nancy, she says you answered it beautifully. I agree. Good job, Bonnie. I won't add any more.
We have this great amendment, a great clause within the Constitution establishing the Electoral College, and then that is based on all the other things that have happened since. So we've got to shore that up. And even with the, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the person who does the Electoral College. Yeah. I would hope that you would agree that we have got to shore up our system. We cannot permit it to be attacked the way it was.
Bonnie, thank you so much. This is awesome. Rosemary, thank you. This is over and above what we were expecting. So
always
this
a pleasure.
A great event.
Always
thank you so much, everybody. We will be posting the video of our event on our website. So if anybody wasn't able to attend, you can share it wildly across. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Thank you again. And we will be coming back to you with another program sometime soon. So thank you, everybody, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.